Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar. Interviewing for a position can feel a bit like an interrogation. You're being drilled with questions one after the next while the interviewer or the panel offers you little to no verbal feedback and nonverbal feedback. In fact, the interviewer may be staring at you with a completely blank face, or maybe you feel like they're staring daggers. Interviewing can be so difficult because you have so little time, frequently about an hour, to communicate all your strengths and why you're the best candidate for that position. Often we as people are taught from an early age that it's impolite to talk about ourselves and therefore have little practice with this type of experience. Yet, of course, the interviewer expects you to talk about yourself in such a way as often been described as the humble brag. Just confident enough to demonstrate that you're the person for the job, yet not coming off as arrogant. In order for the interview to go really well, I usually think it takes two things. One, that you have to know yourself really well, and two, that you have to know the company really well. Then you have to communicate to your future employer how you can contribute to their organization. My name is Taylor Johnston. I'm one of the career counselors at the Texas Tech University Career Center, and I help students daily to highlight themselves, their skills, and abilities to convey to employers why they are the ideal candidate for a position. Today, we will cover information about a typical interview structure, types of interviews, typical interview questions, nonverbal communication occurring during the interview, and appropriate responses to the questions. So the purpose of the interview is for you as a candidate to share your skills, abilities, education, personal attributes, and experiences that sell you as a great fit for the company. If you have an interview, then on paper, the employer already knows that you meet the minimum qualifications. Now the purpose of the interview is for you to demonstrate that personality-wise, you fit in well with the company and can benefit them. Another purpose for the interview is for you as the interviewee to see if you would be interested in working for this company. So do you really want to work for this company? Finally, obviously, the overall goal is to be offered a position. Often we think of the interview as kind of a test. We think we need to answer all questions correctly. But instead, a more useful analogy is that the interview is more like a conversation. There may not necessarily be a right or wrong answer, but instead the interviewer is focused on the other things that you're trying to communicate. Therefore, while we say an interview is important, it may not actually be as important as we think. In fact, the employer may not remember a lot of what you say during the interview, but instead may be more likely to remember the feeling that you gave the employer throughout the interview. Do you demonstrate confidence, intelligence, an ability to communicate effectively and think critically? These are the attributes employers are looking for throughout the interview process. A great technique for reducing your anxiety surrounding the interview is preparing thoroughly before the interview. In order to prepare as much as possible for the interview, it's important that you, as the interviewee, research the company, focus on what makes them different from other companies. What is the mission or their overall goal, and what are their future goals? And then focus during the interview on how you can contribute to fulfilling those future goals. Also, you'll want to prepare several different types of stories that will assist you in answering the behavioral or situational questions. During this webinar, we will discuss this more in some of the future slides. You will also want to have done your research concerning an appropriate typical salary for this type of position. Prior to the interview, you'll want to prepare a resume, and depending on your field, potentially some kind of portfolio as well. The way you dress will certainly not get you the job, but it may communicate that you're taking this job very seriously and might be a good representative for this company. One of the most common things students forget throughout the interview is to smile. Smiling communicates confidence to the potential employer. It also communicates a positive outlook and releases endorphins in your brain that may actually trick you into feeling more confident. If you tell an employer that you love the field that you're going into, and the nonverbals don't match your message. Therefore, it's important to smile and communicate congruency between your nonverbals and your verbal statements. I usually suggest that you try to arrive 10 to 15 minutes early before the interview. I suggest you don't arrive more than 15 minutes early because you may put the interviewer in a bind and make them feel like they need to complete their task more quickly in order to avoid leaving you waiting in the lobby longer. 10 to 15 minutes early communicates your understanding of the importance of the interview. The interview starts the moment you exit your car and go into the building. You never know who is watching you or how important their opinion is to the hiring manager. Therefore, it's best to remain as professional, friendly, and polite as possible all before the interview. In order to avoid seeming like you have somewhere better to be or something else better to be doing, leave your phone off even while you're in the waiting room before the interview. Because often positions are given based on how likely a person is to fit in well with that company's culture, it's important to engage in appropriate soft skills. Soft skills include things like shaking hands with the interviewer, things like smiling, making good eye contact, showing enthusiasm for the job, and seeming relaxed and confident, but not too relaxed, all help demonstrate your ability to fit in well with that company. So the about you, about us, some questions about strengths and weaknesses. These are typical interview questions, and we'll go through these questions and see what information the employer is trying to identify with each of these questions. Also, we'll share some tips to answer these questions, and hopefully in a credible way that highlights your strengths and abilities. Typically, most interviews begin with the very open-ended question, something along the lines of, tell me about yourself. Usually this is your most anxious part of the interview process because it's right at the very beginning. Therefore, while there are several ways to respond to this question, including sharing information that is unique about you that you did not share in the resume, I tend to suggest a formula to answer this question. My formula is share where you're from, because sometimes this makes a very quick connection with somebody. And then share your education, your experience that's related to the job, a personal fact about yourself, and then end the response with something related to the company. It can make your response sound more confident to end it with something like, due to my interest in this field and your company's reputation, that's what led me to apply for this particular position. Sharing a personal detail about yourself can allow the interviewer to assign some sort of emotional content to what you're saying and therefore be more likely to remember you in the future. An example of a personal detail you might share is something like, during my time at Texas Tech, I enjoyed attending football games due to the traditions surrounding football. I personally would never share this fact because I have a very limited interest in football. The most important part of the tell me about yourself question is to keep it brief. Usually you want your responses to be between 30 and 45 seconds, but a minute and a half at the longest. Here's a sample from one of my colleagues, Gabriel, who coordinates marketing here at the University Career Center. I thought this example was particularly engaging. He says, hi, my name is Gabriel Jimenez. I'm currently studying marketing at Texas Tech University. My friends and family usually turn to me for anything social media or graphic design related. I hope to find a full-time position that allows me to do both of these. Based on my interests and passions, I hope to help your company express their mission in a meaningful and reliable way or relatable way. For this why our company or why are you a good fit for this program type of question, you want to demonstrate that you've researched. You want to indicate that you aren't just looking for a job in the field or acceptance into a program, but rather that you're seeking a position or admittance with their company, and you want to be performing the tasks listed on the job description. The types of topics that you want to research about the company is what makes them different or similar to other organizations. What's its purpose and mission statement? And what are some of the future goals? Then if you can demonstrate how you can contribute to this company's future goals, this will set you apart even further from the other candidates. For the what are your strengths question, it's helpful if the strengths would be useful at the position that you're applying for. Often when I ask this question in mock interviews, students will give me a list of their strengths. So rather than provide a list of your strengths, I suggest you share maybe 2 to 3 strengths and examples of those. This will make your strengths sound more credible. Also, these examples will make your strength more memorable. If you list several strengths without providing examples, the interviewer may forget your response before you're even finished it. However, if you provide examples with this, it'll make your response more memorable, particularly stories like examples, because when we hear stories, we put ourselves in those stories, and we're more likely to remember those stories. That's why myths and legends are so easily passed down from generation to generation. So, example, if you tell me that you're a strong communicator and work well under pressure, I may or may not believe and remember that. But if you tell me about a specific time when you were waiting tables on Valentine's Day at a really nice restaurant and made the experience enjoyable to your customers and got them their food quickly, I'm going to be much more likely to remember something like that you're a strong communicator and work well under pressure. So, for the what are your weaknesses question, I always suggest you only share one weakness. We want the majority of the interview to be focused on the positive things. Also, we never want to avoid talking about negative things, but we want to remain as positive as possible throughout the interview. Therefore, this can be a particularly challenging question for lots of students. In order to assist you in answering the weakness question, I suggest that you think of a weakness just as a strength, taking it a little bit too far sometimes. Also, I suggest you share when you notice the weakness and the steps you have taken in order to try to overcome it, and then finish the response with how you have improved. So, for example, I like to think things through very carefully and make highly informed decisions. But sometimes that leads to me spending too long on one task and maybe overthinking it just a little bit. I noticed this area of weakness in college when I was trying to decide which topic to select for a certain presentation. Since I noticed this area of weakness, I've tried to give myself a certain amount of time to contemplate the decision, narrow it down, and then just finally make the decision. I also engage in some self-talk to stay focused and decisive. So since I have taken those steps, I feel like I have really improved in this area and hope to continue to improve further in the future. For the where do you see yourself in 5 years, they want to see that you still have an interest in the field, are ambitious and goal oriented, and considering how you can still contribute. It's okay if you're a little vague with this response. You don't have to have your future completely mapped out right now. So here's a sample response to this. 5 years from now, I hope to be working for a company like yours in this field. At that time, I hope to be shouldering more responsibility within the company and reaping the rewards of working for a company like yours. I hope to be setting goals for myself and reaching these goals. So for this question, it's fine to say that you hope to be promoted as long as it's an achievable goal within that amount of time. You'll want to avoid talking about promotion, though, if you are being promoted at that company, would mean that you're taking the person's job who's interviewing you. So why should we consider you for this position instead of several other equally qualified candidates? This is always a tough question, and can sound a bit insulting sometimes. How do they know the candidate are all equally qualified? Because you have such little time in the interview, I suggest you ignore that part of the question and focus on what you can contribute. So really what they're asking is, what makes you unique? Therefore, focus on how you can uniquely contribute. You have 3 areas to pull from to respond to this question, or questions similar to it. So number 1, your education. Number 2, your experience. And number 3, you can pull from your own personal attributes. They may ask this question in different ways throughout the interview, and by focusing more on one of these areas each time, you can respond differently with each question. Similar questions are like, what makes you unique? Why you? How has your background prepared you for this position? If you have international experience or experience with different cultures, as this is a good area to focus on. Also, if you have any family legacy, then you also might want to share that as well. Really just anything that makes you unique and how you can contribute. Also, with this question, it can be helpful to focus again on your specific interest to that organization. This company provides blank, unique experience to its customers, and I think due to my blank experience, I could be a valuable member to your team. Um, so a little bit of some sample behavior questions. So tell me about a professor or supervisor you didn't like and why. Uh, they're trying to trick you. They are asking you a question to make you talk negatively about someone from your past most of the time, but they actually don't want to hear anything negative. If you share something negative, they may think that they're going to wonder if you're going to say that same thing about them someday. They may actually identify more with the supervisor than you. With this question, they're assessing how do you handle conflict. They want to see that you can take ownership for the part that you played in the issue. To make this response easier, focus on those I statements. So, for example, I was not used to his leadership style, or I was used to more or less structure. Then, after you've described the situation, focus on the steps that you took in order to overcome this situation. So, things like, I began taking better notes, or I formed a study group. I discussed my questions over the material with my professor during his office hours, and then end it with the positive outcome that really emphasizes the part. This issue, so for example, this issue never interfered with my performance, and after I took those steps, I was able to make a good grade and make an A in the class. This experience really taught me independence, and I was really able to grow as a person. Those types of positive endings. Behavioral questions are those questions that they ask you a time in the past, or to recall a time in your past, or a time in the future, and how did you behave, or how would you behave to that? They will either be positive or negative focused. And if they're negative focused, it's your job to flip that coin and to make it into a positive. We've already covered some sample behavioral questions. So like, tell me about a professor or supervisor that you didn't like and why. It's for these questions you want to have several types of stories prepared beforehand and ready to go. With these questions, they're asking for specific examples. They don't want to hear general statements. In order to answer these questions more smoothly, you can use the STAR method. So first share the situation and task, what happened, then share the actions that you took in order to overcome the problem, and then the positive result of the actions you took. So for example, if I was asked, tell me about a time you faced a challenge and how did you overcome it? I might say something like, when I began my previous job, I was asked to update the website. But because I had little experience with websites, I viewed this as a rather intimidating project, but certainly was eager to learn and this new information necessarily in order to complete the task. So I quickly began reading materials on HTML coding and watched as many YouTube videos as possible. I also attended several mini workshops on anything website related that I could find. I take pleasure in identifying patterns and solving problems, so therefore I viewed each new issue along the way as a challenge to overcome. Ultimately, I thought it took several different types of trial and error throughout the process, but I was able to successfully complete the updating of the company's entire website. This experience allowed me to learn a new skill and contribute to the company in a very unique way. Asking good questions can demonstrate an interest in the company. It's important to come to an interview prepared with several questions to demonstrate your interest and to have a few extra prepared if they answer some of your questions throughout the interview that you've already written down. I usually use three things to evaluate interview questions. So number one, is it an open-ended question? Meaning, it would take them a while to respond to it versus a yes or no response. The more you get the interviewer talking, I think the better the interview is going to be. Number two, does it demonstrate that you researched the company? You might focus on something specific you found about them. For example, like I noticed online you're wanting to expand to a such and such new location. But what are your steps in order to do that? Number 3, does it demonstrate that you're thinking about how you can contribute to them and not what they can do for you? That's probably the most important thing. That's why I suggest you avoid salary or benefits questions. Wait until the job offer to answer those. Also, I tend to think the person who gives the first number loses until they say they want you for the position. Before you leave the interview, don't forget to thank them for the opportunity and ask for a business card in case you have any follow-up questions. Through getting the business cards, you can have their contact information to write them a brief thank you note. As you leave, you might shake their hands again. I usually suggest you follow their lead on this. After the interview, you might take some notes so that you remember more about the questions and the types of things that they're looking for. This taking notes can be helpful for writing the thank you notes and for the type of second interview you might have with the company. In your thank you note, you want to thank them for the opportunity. You want to briefly reiterate your interest and ability to contribute to the company, and add something specific that happened in the interview to help them remember you better and personalize the information better. So to wrap up this webinar, we also want to mention that here at the Career Center, you can schedule a mock interview to practice interviewing skills. A career representative will ask you questions related to your field and position and provide you with feedback to improve your responses throughout. To schedule a mock interview with the University Career Center, simply give us a call, 742-806-742-2210, and we'll schedule you with either an individual mock interview or a panel mock interview. And if you have any questions, you can email me at Taylor, Taylor.Johnston, Johnston, @ttu.edu. Thank y'all.